Hi, what is going on in Hazara right now? As part of a large and coordinated onslaught of Taliban on Hazara-dominated rural areas of central Afghanistan, known as Hazara, indigenous Hazara farmers are being forced to leave their homes and ancestral lands in several villages in the Ghazab region of Daikundi province, given 3 to 9 days deadline. Thousands of Hazaras are forced to leave or face death and torture, strikingly similar to a century earlier in Hazara during the reign of Abdul Rahman Khan. This needs to stop. Help us to prevent the repeat of a bitter and murderous history for Hazaras and a civil war in Afghanistan. What has been happening in Hazara is not a new narrative and has been happening for hundreds of years now as part of a larger project to ethnically cleanse and rid Hazaras of their ancestral lands and distribute it amongst Abdul Rahman's loyalists in the 1890s and onwards, and presently to the Taliban and their sympathizers, particularly the Kutchis or nomads. Here is a rundown of the events to make sense of this. Since the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban on the 15th of August 2021, their loyalists have claimed ownership of about 15 Hazara villages in Shagulja and Taqabdar regions, evicting residents of Kandir village in the first phase. The lands are taken as gifts by the Taliban's loyalists who fought alongside them over the past 2 decades. So far, 800 farmer families are displaced and over 2,000 families are given close deadlines by the Taliban. These evictions have taken place by the Taliban's gunmen forcefully removing families from their land and homes, detonating bombs on their homes and burning their crops. This is a literal example of ethnic cleansing of Hazaras from Afghanistan and an early sign of genocide today as we speak. We fear history is repeating itself through this shocking, forcible acquisition of ancestral Hazara lands. Over the course of history, Afghan rulers have used incentives such as offering fertile Hazara lands and slaves to their loyalists. Only during the rule of Abdul Rahman, besides the genocide and mass enslavement of Hazaras, 400,000 Hazara families were forced to leave their homes. These families had no option but to flee to neighbouring countries or take shelter in harsh, cold and inhospitable mountainous areas of Hazara. Their lands distributed as awards amongst the Pashtun tribes who took part in the brutal genocide of Hazaras. For example, in the 1890s, Abdul Rahman, to encourage popular support for the war on Hazaras in Kandahar, on one occasion, the Emir sent some 350 families of Sheikh Ali Hazaras from Kabul to be distributed as gifts for the main Durrani tribes in the region. These slave gifts were accompanied by massive propaganda campaigns that promised the land and the heads of Hazaras for those participating in the war. The mobilization campaign, particularly its propaganda component, achieved a high degree of success. The call for jihad stirred extreme anti-Shia biases, which were further encouraged and maintained by promises of spoils of war in the forms of land and Hazara slaves. First, the Emir redistributed extensive Hazara territories as rewards to new Pashtun settlers. In Uruzgan alone, 12,000 Durrani and 4,000 Ghilzai families were ordered to settle in the formerly Hazara lands. The Pashtun nomad tribes, probably the most enthusiastic participants of the war, received decrees for the ownership of Hazarajat's pasturized land, which was initially declared state property before being converted to private land. Historically, Afghan rulers have employed various strategies of direct force and inflicting terror in Hazara villages by instructing their soldiers to kidnap or kill locals or Hazara-populated regions. The Taliban also used similar tactics of terror and direct force to evict Hazara farmers. These local villagers and rightful owners of land are tortured, their crops are destroyed and explosives are detonated on and in their homes, all to inflict fear enforce the displacement of Hazaras and to lead the ethnic cleansing campaign against the Hazara people. So as a result of the historic ethnic cleansing and forcibly removing Hazaras, as well as the several acts of genocide and torture against Hazaras, the Hazara population has significantly reduced and their lands have reduced dramatically in size. Charles Mason, a British reporter and explorer of the 19th century, writes about the attacks of Pashtuns and Hazara lands in southern Afghanistan. He says, Wardak belonged to Hazaras before 100 years and Pashtuns overthrew them by force from these areas. One can say that Hazaras were holding the lands from Karabakh to Ghazna and in the same way were being forced out of these areas as well. In fact, the invasion of Hazara lands by Pashtuns still continues as part of the same project as they are still collecting their distribution of lands commanded by the murderous and genocidal Abdul Rahman Khan. So as a result of the ongoing forced eviction of Hazaras and offering them as gifts to warlords, millions of Hazaras have lost their land and are turned into refugees in neighbouring countries and other parts of central Afghanistan. Unfortunately, this tragedy still takes place. In the past by Abdul Rahman and Afghan kings, now by the Taliban, who committed blatant genocide and mass killings against Hazaras in Bamiyan and Mazar-e-Sharif in the late 1990s under the guise of sending Hazaras to Qabristan. In the past 20 years, Hazaras have mainly been pro-democracy, who especially have focused on education for both men and women and have been at the forefront contributing towards the creation of an open and equal society. With the collapse of the Afghan government and the exit of international forces from Afghanistan, unfortunately, history is repeating itself and mass human rights violations against Hazaras are happening in the hands of the Taliban, who continue with the ethnic cleansing agendas of their previous rulers and Taliban's previous ruling over Afghanistan. Many world genocides in our modern history and earlier in the 20th century could have been prevented if we as individuals, groups and communities took action. Remaining silent on the face of the Taliban's clear genocidal campaign is being complicit in a preventable human tragedy. We say never again. Afghan diaspora, the local, national and wider international community, including politicians, civil society, media and allies of Hazaras, raise your voices against stealing Hazara lands and get behind the protection of Hazara ancestral lands. We urge you to educate yourself and those around you and raise awareness of the ongoing human tragedy. Document, record and collect evidence about these genocidal campaigns and share it with us. Write letters to your parliamentary representatives about your concerns for the Hazara people. Arrange meetings with your parliamentary representatives to amplify your concerns about this genocidal campaign in the parliament for a government response. Share this information with your personal networks, social media and friendship circles and push for local, national and international recognition of these genocidal campaigns to be given wider support to stop stealing Hazara's ancestral lands. Your voice matters. Be on the right side of history. Put a stop to stealing Hazara ancestral lands.